We were together at 46th Street and Times Square. It was a scene of tremendous tension through the evening that shifted. Talk about the police on horseback.
Well, we were located at a sort of flashpoint in the confrontation between the protesters and the police at Times Square. There was a barricade line in front of us that prevented the demonstrators from entering into the main strip that most people would recognize as Times Square. There's hundreds and hundreds of people backed up at this point. The police were attempting...
Just in that area, there were thousands of people
just in that area alone.
Thousands
were, you're correct, thousands were in the area of Times Square, but in that intersection where we were, hundreds and hundreds of people were backed up as far as you could see. The police were attempting to push that barricade line back into the crowd. Some officers physically picked up the metal barricades and used them as shields, pushing back into the crowd. Tensions reached a boiling point when the barricades were opened, and the police allowed officers on horseback to enter into the crowded space. Admittedly, some people chose to stand their ground as the NYPD repeatedly told them to back off, but those who wanted to move really couldn't. There was no space to get away, and these horses were pushed into the crowd. I witnessed one officer actually spurring his horse into the people. Demonstrators were terrified. They were screaming. One young woman next to me was saying over and over again, "You're going to kill somebody." At one point, one of the horses went down, and it was near pandemonium. People couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
The horse went down on its knees.
That's correct.
Almost as if it didn't want to charge the crowd.
The horses actually did seem resistant to being pushed into this massive crowd of people. I mean, there was bright lights, loud noises, and nowhere for the people to go. I saw one young woman whose nose was literally up against the chest of a horse. I don't understand and didn't understand at that moment and continue to not understand what the NYPD was trying to do.
And what was particularly frightening about this area at 46th and Broadway was there were two large steam pipes that could fall over at any point. It was funneling the steam about 10 feet up so that it wouldn't burn people from the ground extremely hot. People were being pushed back into those plastic steam protectors.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It was dangerous on a number of levels. Just the sheer amount of people, the horses, which are unpredictable, in that crowd where no one could get away, and then these teetering towers of steam.
And then talk about the barricades.
Correct. As I mentioned, the officers would at times pick up the barricades. 6 or so officers would pick up the barricades by their uprights and use them as sort of broad shields and push them into the crowd. There was one point when there was a metal piece of the barricade that had stuck out perpendicular, and that was shoved into the crowd right near where I was standing. It stopped just short of my stomach. I told the officers that this is dangerous. It really could have hurt somebody there.
And of course, because of the number of people, the thousands of people in Times Square, those at the very front where we were at the front of the barricade, there was absolutely nowhere to go when the police said move back and started pushing back, and when the horses were there.
That's exactly the issue, is that there was no place for these people to go. Even though the NYPD was saying move back, there was no way to move back. It was a sea of people. It
was extremely tense. It looked like there were going to be even more arrests in this area. The police were moving in en masse until the 4-star commander came out.
Yes, that's correct. Joseph Esposito, as I understand it, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD, came in and he called the officers back from the line. They took about 3 steps back. And I
mean, this was an amazing moment because it looked like he was coming forward to tell the police to move forward. And instead, he told the police to back off. To many of the police shock. You saw them looking at each other. You're telling us to move back? And he said, yes, move back.
It really was an incredible moment, and the decision was met with, huge applause from the crowd. They started chanting, "I love you," and it was a really refreshing...
Well, they actually started chanting, "Police are the 99%.
Yes, they did. And it was a refreshing glimpse at what these confrontations could look like. Esposito responded in a civil way to civil disobedience, and I think that's key.
And within minutes, the entire confrontation was over. People weren't there to protest the police. The people we were speaking to. They were there to express a point about inequality. And once the police backed off, the whole thing dissipated so quickly.
Yeah, it deflated incredibly rapidly after Esposito intervened in that way. And it really goes to show how these things could proceed in a different way if there isn't an expectation of violence or an expectation of confrontation. If the police actually work with and understand that these people aren't out there. I've seen a number of these demonstrations. These aren't violent protesters not seeking to damage public property or hurt the public. They just want to express their grievances.